Welcome to Utah Stories. So today on the program, we're talking about why the Historic Utah Pantages Theater was demolished and given away to one of the most wealthy development companies developers in the United States. Why it was given away to him for $1, and why they demolished it before they even had financing to build something new. Now, this Pantages Theater, if you looked at it from the outside, nothing special. It just had sort of a modern facade over it and wasn't being used. But the city's RDA, the redevelopment agency, bought the property about, I think, 10 or 15 years ago. But on the program today, I have with me Michael Valentine, who was fighting to save the Pantages Theater. He knows all about what was happening, the development deal. And thanks for coming on the show, Michael.
Thanks, man. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, so I have on my screen now, I want to show a few photos of what this theater looked like in its heyday.
Yeah.
This was the main seating area. You can see it kind of resembles, to a degree, the Capitol Theater.
Yep. It originally had about 2,300 seats in it, 1,700 on the main ground, another 600 in the mezzanine. And it was actually bigger and more opulent than the Capitol Theater. And they're actually kitty corner to each other. The backs are touching, so it's right around the corner of the Capitol. They're pretty much sister theaters there.
Yeah, it's just so incredibly ornate and beautiful. Look at this stained glass window that was a panel.
Yeah, that's about 50 feet wide. It's huge. Every time I went in there, I forgot how giant it was. And then we actually, I reached out to Sotheby's in New York. We had a appraiser who was an expert in Tiffany skylights that was going to come out and appraise it. The skylights estimated to be worth somewhere around $50,000 to up to $1 million.
Jeez. And
Yeah.
so what happened to that skylight?
When they destroyed the theater, Hines took out all the ornate ornamentation, all the historic artifacts, so it's in a warehouse somewhere. And our fight still rages on. So the theater was destroyed in April of 2022. They hurry and rush to destroy the theater because we had about 3 lawsuits in place. One of them was about to go in front of the state Supreme Court of Utah. And now we're fighting to, get the land back and see the historic artifacts returned. And it's kind of a crazy idea, but we actually have architects lined up. We already have the blueprints for the theater, and so it's my plan to rebuild the Pantages brick for brick. There's actually I got the idea from a tavern in England. It's called the Carlton Tavern. It was illegally destroyed in 2015. And the developers were made to rebuild it, and kind of, can kind of bring justice to this story and kind of set a precedence. So we're very progressive across the nation on historic restoration. And our plan wasn't to just save the theater, but to rebuild it, restore it to, and have it reopened for a place for cinema, for the future of arts and education and all sorts of wild things. So all that stuff can still happen. And now we kind of joke, once it's rebuilt in another 50 years, it'll be historic again. But
So why was it illegally demolished in your opinion, or according to the law that you're looking at?
Yeah. So it's kind of a wild story. There's a lot of parts to this. I brought like a 10-page document kind of highlighting stuff. It's really one of the worst tales of corruption that I know of in Salt Lake City history. The theater was worth about $20 million. They gave it away to Hines for free. It was a $0 deal. Hines is a company, a giant real estate conglomerate. They manage about like $160 billion or something ridiculous. One of the biggest companies in the world. So some of the issues here, it's like, well, first of all, this should have never been destroyed. It was a historic building. Is part of it. And the second part of this is, why is this giant billionaire company getting any city property for free? Mm-hmm. And it should be noted too, I am a candidate for mayor of Salt Lake City this year, running specifically because of this. I've been fighting for 4 years to save this theater. And a lot of people just asked me to run because of what the work we were doing here. And so we also set up like a nonprofit for the theater, so it's an official 501c3. It's called Friends of the Pantages, and have ongoing, fights to see justice here. But basically, the story here is there's this an agency in the city, so called the RDA, the Redevelopment Agency. It's basically a pool of all of our city resources and property, dozens of acres, millions and millions of dollars of real estate. And the problem here was this was a publicly owned building. It was historic, so we have certain laws. There's historic laws all across the country, but the main two laws that were violated was a Utah law that basically said any city agency dealing with historic property, they have to do all this stuff and notify SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and go through this whole process that never happened. And the more damning thing is in 2012.
So what's SHPO?
SHPO is the State Historic Preservation Office.
Okay, so that
agency
governor is supposed to manage the preservation of the publicly owned buildings or the privately owned, or both?
Yeah, it's just kind of both. It's like it's basically the historic office, the biggest historic office in Utah. It's a department under the governor, and pretty much every state has a state historic office. But yeah, there was an actual law, a Utah law that says, when dealing with historic properties, the city agency, has to follow this process. That wasn't followed. If it was a public property that was not eligible for the National Registry, which is on the federal level.
Well, didn't the mayor claim that it would be some ridiculous amount of money to try to restore it, like $68 million?
Yeah. I'll get to that in a second. It's a good point. But so the Utah law was violated, but then more damning was the city law was violated. So in 2012, there's a document. It's a city ordinance, so it's a law. It's the community preservation plan. It's about 200 pages. This just giant ordinance was passed, and ironically, it was passed when Erin Mendenhall, the current mayor of Salt Lake, her husband was on city council, Kyle Lamafa. So it was passed in 2012, and it's basically, guiding all the city stuff on historic things. And the big thing that happened, and again, why this was so corrupt, because this whole time they've had this false narrative, this theater is not eligible for the National Registry. And that's important because it triggers, once it's on the National Registry, it has to be made a Salt Lake City landmark, and that would actually protect it from demolition. The National Registry is more about historic tax credits and other things. It's more of like an honorary designation, but then it triggers, more local ordinances that have more teeth to protect it.
So why was it never put on the historic preservation?
That's the main crux of this, because if it was, it would have been saved. So, and what's crazy about this is we were fighting this for so long. In 2021. We actually hired Kirk Huffaker, who's the former director of Preservation Utah. He was the director of Preservation Utah about 20 years. Yeah, he's awesome. One of the smartest historic guys around.
He's written some books, some history books.
Yeah, so we actually hired him to put the Pantages on the National Registry. He did the whole report, and it was submitted in the fall of 2021. And that process, it goes to the city has a historic landmark commission. So it went to the city office, an office under Erin Mendenhall. And there was a meeting, and they all agreed with us that it was historic. Erin's own office, that's her department. And so at that point, it went to the state historic office. They all agreed, and it was about to be sent to the national level, and it would have been put on the National Registry, which then would have triggered it to become a Salt Lake City landmark. And then Hines and the mayor and everyone in the city colluded, and they hurried and gave the property to the developers because then they could object as owners. So this was all collusion.
Wait a minute. They could object as owners?
Yeah. So since it was a publicly owned property, we had the right. So
once they gave it away privately, they could object.
Submit it.
But the city wouldn't be able to object if she would have kept the property.
Yeah. So if they hurried and rushed the transaction, the contract was signed in 2019. So it's funny that they hurried and gave the deal about a week before it's about to be on the National Registry. Wow. And there's also a crazy timeline here too. So that was in November of 2021. We had that city meeting, and then there was that state meeting, and it was going off. I had finally got a hold of Erin Mendenhall to meet with her. So she scheduled the meeting. The next week, she gave the property to Hines, and then we had the meeting, and she sat there and didn't say anything the whole time. And the whole meeting was set up in bad faith. It took me 2 years to meet with Erin Mendenhall, and after the meeting, this is verbatim what she said. She's like, "Sorry, I can't do anything. The house has been sold." So I've been working on this deal for a long time, and we started a nonprofit. We've done all these things, worked to put the theater on the National Registry, which would have brought in, by the way, about $10 or $15 million in tax credits to rebuild the theater. But I basically tried to meet with her to give her the whole deal on a silver platter. I was talking to the Eccles. I was We have we reached out to Tacoma Pantages. The Pantages is like a big theater chain. Like ours isn't the only one. There's one in Hollywood. There's a bunch all over. The Tacoma Pantages, our sister theater, was restored in 2018 for about 18.5 million. The city was claiming for a long time ours would have costed $60 to $80 million, but all the numbers were inflated. They inflated the restoration cost by about $40 million. And again, I'm not a theater expert, but I know because we reached out to a group called Evergreen Architectural Arts. They're some of the most experienced historic restoration experts in the country. They restored the Tacoma Pantages. They restored the Hollywood. They just restored hundreds of theaters. The Library of Congress. They were actually here recently just restoring the temple for the church. But they discredited those numbers. These are experts on a national level, and they do like a lot of the interior work, and they sent me all these scopes and things. And
it did seem I did a story on these couple who were restoring buildings on Main Street in Helper, Utah.
Yeah,
and they showed me this bank, and they had to redo all of the plaster work. This really ornate plaster. And I said, how in the heck did you do that? And they said, well, we contacted the community guy who does ceramics.
Right.
He teaches ceramics at like the local high school or university.
Right.
And he loved the project. They did it with their students. They created the plaster casts.
That's so cool.
And then they restored this entire amazing facade of the plaster inside of there as a community project.
Yeah.
And I said, so what did that cost you? And he said, you wouldn't believe it. Plaster is really cheap.
Yeah.
It didn't cost much at all.
That's what Evergreen
and
does. Yeah. They specialize in all the plaster work. So they gave me a rough estimate, and they're like, oh, it's probably about $5 to $7 million. That's to like turn it back to what it was.
Yeah.
But
check out the screen. I've got the Tacoma restored.
That's our sister
Pantages.
theater. Restored for $18.5 million.
18.5.
Which is a far cry from 60 to 80 million.
Almost the federal tax credit could cover the entire restoration.
Yeah, the way the tax credits work is it's based on like a percentage of what the final costs were. The actual restoration costs of the Pantages were about 35 to 40 million. So at that level, we could have gotten about 10 to 12 million dollars, which is a big chunk of change. You know, and the other thing too is like the restoration could have been done in phases. It didn't all need to be restored at once. You know, we could have restored a bunch of it, had it saved and be opened, and come back and done more if needed. And the crazy thing about Tacoma, too, is when I talked to them, they were so excited we reached out to them, and they were ready to fly to Salt Lake to help us restore the theater for free.
Really?
Like, they just wanted to be a part of it because this is a big international, kind of group of, like, theater people, and people love movies and historic preservation and movie palaces. And, so there's this weird bubble here in Utah where it's like this whole narrative was literally created by Danny Waltz and Hines. Danny Waltz is the RDA director under Erin Mendenhall. It was all fabricated. They lied about every single part of this deal.
Was he in place before she came into power?
Yeah.
So, I mean, to play devil's advocate, so when the RDA bought the property, they probably envisioned a way of monetizing it that could bring in a lot more tax revenue than the theater. And with the Eccles Theater being built across the street, do you think that there was a kind of an ongoing conflict there?
So not really, because this is I know all the stories because the city's tried to create these narratives so many times. And again, I appreciate you having me on here because a lot of the press hasn't covered this in the way it's needed to be covered. I've been fighting with the Salt Lake Tribune for a lot. They keep quoting those false restoration numbers, and I've given them expert contacts, and they never report the truth. So what you just said is one of the narratives that Mendenhall keeps liking to use. It wasn't me, it was Jackie Busquepsky. But that's not true because Erin's been on the city council since 2014. In 2016, when they had votes for exclusive agreements for Hines and LaSalle to basically hold the theater hostage so no one else could come in and bid on it, we were trying to bid on it. I made an offer to buy the theater twice for $2 million at the last one. So the whole narrative, like, oh, this wasn't Erin Mendenhall, it's like she was on the city council. She kind of controlled every part about this. She took donations from Joel LaSalle while this was being negotiated, one of the theater developers. The contract was literally signed November 5th, the day Erin was elected. And then the next month in December, she voted for the $0 deal, didn't recuse herself, didn't disclose the donations. And then since she's been the mayor, she's done everything to kill this deal.
Yeah, we broke that story actually.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of a little bit unclear still How does Joel LaSalle fit into all of this?
Yeah, so it goes back to the exclusive agreement. So, real quick about what you're saying too. So I actually talked to the old RDA director. He was brought in under Rocky. His name's DJ Baxter. He's awesome. He's the one that negotiated the purchase of the theater. And, I told him, I was like, hey, man, the city's blaming you now for all this. And he's like, what? Because he always loved the theater. The plan was to... it's actually written in the downtown master plan to see the theater restored and reopened for a cultural and activity, thing. Having an apartment complex.
And it was
tower.
Purchased when?
It was purchased 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that downtown master plan was 2016. But the plan, and I talked to DJ about this, was he was working a lot with the Eccles and Spence Eccles, and they loved the theater. Spence always loved the Pantages. I heard a story that he used to work there. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, the plan was always to go to the Eccles and then come back and restore the Pantages. And what's so cool about what we were doing in some of our plans to see it restored is we were making an international theater district. So we have the Capitol right there, right next door, that does like plays or Broadway and more like ballet and some theater, and then the Eccles does like plays and music and different live shows. The Pantages could have been a movie theater, and the other wild thing about this is I've talked to everyone. I don't know if you could pull up our that render real quick of what our plans were. But I talked to Spy Hop. There was a plan in 2014 originally to make it a media center. It was Spy Hop, the Utah Film Center, and Salt Lake Film Society, and they're all trying to buy the theater and have like this awesome, space for film and arts and stuff. But it just didn't work out, and I didn't meet him at the time because I could have helped him. But so I love that plan, and we kind of took that and ran with it. But I've talked to Spy Hop. I talked to them since then. Our plan kind of shows, a restored theater, and we were working with Kirk Huffaker on this to make sure we were utilizing the tax credits and all these stuff, and we were starting to bring in more investors and talking to the Eccles and things. But we were going to restore the theater, build additional screens above. I was talking to the Broadway and Film Society about bringing their theaters over because there's a block or two away. We were going to have space for film education. That middle part there with the glass was kind of like an atrium. So there was 4 stores that were right there too. We were going to bring those up and add some more stores, kind of have a shopping kind of area right there. And the other group we were working with on a national level is a group called the League of Historic American Theaters. They actually did studies on our Pantages Theater in 2015 and showed plans to see it restored, plans to build additional housing above, condos, a
So you
hotel.
could build far above it?
Yeah, this has been happening all over the country. Yeah.
You can take an existing old building and just build right on top of it?
Yeah, we were just planning to build right on top of it, and we were starting to work with these other groups and investors and other people, like what kind of, could we build affordable housing above the theater? And it's like, who wouldn't want to live above an awesome theater downtown, in the middle of a theater district? And then we had like ideas for rooftop botanical gardens and all these things. So it was like, it wasn't just restoring the theater. It was like this whole big plan. I call it like a cinema paradise. And we were trying to bring everyone together. And there's been talks, Rocky keeps mentioning Amy Redford and all this stuff and some of the things that, but I actually reached out to Amy Redford, and I was trying to bring Sundance into this.
Robert Redford's daughter.
Yeah, Robert Redford's daughter. And she's a filmmaker like me, and when I first talked to her, she was very excited about this. And we talked about, we had all these satellite things, basically we had the world's greatest film festival. We had all these great film groups, the Film Center, the Film Society, and all these things. We have incredible film history in Utah. I argue it's like, on par with New York and California. With the Westerns and like John Ford and just incredible stuff here. And then the fourth element was like, the next great filmmakers. I really think they're coming from Utah. We just kind of set up a directors club. So when I talked to Amy, she was like, this is so cool. Like we're trying to just bring it all under one roof. And I always worried about Sundance leaving. There's actually an article yesterday. They're claiming they're not going to leave, Utah, which I hope is true. But we were trying to bring it all under one thing. And Amy was trying to set up a meeting with me in Mendenhall, like way back. And, I found out after, just, she stopped returning my calls. She's like friends with Erin, so she kind of put her friendship above, what's, in my opinion, what's best for the community and what's best for Utah film and the arts and stuff. So another crazy story is I have a shop down at the Gateway. It's like a cider shop, and when I first opened down there last summer, some of the dudes from the Utah Arts Alliance came in and they're like, oh, you look really familiar. And I'm like, Pantages? And he's like, yeah. But they're like, oh, we really wanted to come out and support you guys and help save the theater, but we were kind of threatened by the city. So they were basically, told not to like die on this hill or be a part of it or associate with us anymore. So it's like...
She's got an amazing... group of people protecting her. I found that the city council is definitely all about protecting each other and her. And one of our investigative journalists calls it Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah, it's really too bad.
They're just like all on board. And she flew a bunch of them out to Miami Beach, Florida, in the middle of winter to study homelessness.
Yeah.
And if I could study homelessness on Miami Beach, Florida, in the middle of winter, sign me up.
It's like, why can't you go to an abatement to study homelessness right here, you know?
Yeah, or go to Denver where it's also really cold. And
that's unbelievable. And it's like, you know, as a candidate for mayor right now, it's really unfortunate because, like, we need a strong city council to hold. It's a different branch of government.
Yeah, there should be some oppositional forces going on and checks and balances. And I find that the Salt Lake Tribune, they don't want to say anything negative regarding the homeless situation and linking it to the mayor's policies.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They will not connect that dot.
Yeah, and
I asked Rocky about it, and it turns out there's this just group of people who are on the Tribune's editorial board. And according to Rocky, he said Holly Mullins is good friends with Jenny Wilson because that's her stepdaughter-in-law.
Yeah.
And she wants to protect Jenny Wilson, who's also really good friends with Mendenhall. And they just put this bubble around her, like, let's not penetrate that, and let's just keep her as this wonderful person who's doing the best thing for Utah.
I stand by this. You know, we did this grandma request in 2021 in March, and that's how I uncovered a lot of the stuff. Like, I'm just a filmmaker. I was just trying to save this building so we could all watch movies together, and our kids and grandkids could come enjoy this. You know. And I really was so naive at the time. I talked to Danny Walsh. I talked to everyone. You know, I actually went and met with the Hines guy, Dusty Harris. I was trying to get them to move the tower somewhere else on the block and be like, look, your building's going to be worth a lot more if we do this theater deal. And then he ended up filing like a fake stalking injunction against me and all this crazy stuff. But like, I was just trying to fight this and save this. And it's so crazy to me that, you know, I'm almost more mad at the press for not covering this, because I really think that if we had this grandma request come out, all this stuff come out in 2021, it would have saved it if the Tribune would have covered this like they should have. And it's wild right now too, because they just did these big exposés on Rocky and Erin, my opponents for mayor here, and it's good. They should interview all the candidates, but they just ignored me. They basically claimed I wasn't a good enough candidate, I guess.
Have you served in public office before?
I haven't. This is the first time I've ever ran. But but what's crazy about this is they did this whole these expose on homelessness. But I've personally been homeless. I believe I'm the only candidate in Utah running for mayor or running for any office that's personally been homeless right now. So it's like pretty wild that they would ignore the homeless candidate on issues on homelessness, and I'm running specifically to end homelessness and stuff. But going back to this, it's just. It's really unfortunate to, people are like, why do you care about this theater? It's been destroyed, like, move on now. But it's like, you're missing the whole point of this. This is not really about one building. It's about historic protection of all of our buildings across all of Utah and Salt Lake. But it's really about, like, hey, this is public property, and it should be going towards the public. And again, it's like, even at the very basic level of this was a $20 million building that they gave away for $0.
Yeah.
That's $20 million that was sucked out of the tax revenues pockets. That's $20 million that could have gone to homelessness, to housing, to the parks.
And again, it's like, why are we giving it to a big, is it a national or even international corporate developer?
Yeah.
Rather than giving it to some local developer who you can more readily hold accountable. Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me.
That's always been my issue too, because I made an offer to buy the theater in 2021 for $500,000. Then we upped the offer to $2 million. I was starting to get investors in there, and the crazy thing too is they were just they were holding this whole thing hostage for a long time. In 2019, under right before Erin was elected, when Jackie was leaving, the reason they hurried and closed the deal because the exclusive agreements were expiring, and it would have opened the theater back up for RFP and other people trying to come buy it.
So if they hadn't closed that deal, what, on the day she was elected, you said?
Well, it was like roughly around that time. I can't remember exactly what day, but it was like the exclusive agreements were only like for they had like 1 year to do like a bunch of research and stuff, like due diligence for the deal, and then they had like another year to like come and purchase it. Yeah. So like if they didn't do that, would have opened it up.
And people would have been able to bid on it.
Yeah,
and potentially
that's really the problem here too. And the other thing about this is like these exclusive agreements. I just remembered you asked me about Joel LaSalle and how he was involved. But like the exclusive agreements were set up. They gave it to adjacent property owners. So he owned like Murphy's Bar
on
that side,
yeah.
and then Hines owns the Kearns building. So they did this weird deal. And then Joel LaSalle is the guy who gave donations to Erin's campaign while this was being negotiated. Like a week after David Ammett of Preservation Utah showed up to the RDA meeting, was like, hey, this building's historic. It needs to be placed on the registry and stuff. And then like hours after that meeting, there's like emails of collusion between Joel LaSalle, Dusty Harris of Hines, and the RDA, like basically like, hey, this David Ammett showed up and we need to like talk about this, and like hiding the facts that it's historic.
Did you acquire those emails?
Yeah, we got them from Grandma. Yeah, they're part of this. We also found emails about them asking for blanket grandma exemptions, which is illegal. Them asking to hurry and close the deal before the public ever finds out about it. Just like sign the contract.
Really?
Yeah.
They said that in an email.
They said it in an email. Yeah.
Wow.
Like verbatim.
We don't want the public to find out,
yeah.
so let's just do it.
And that's what's the wild thing about this is like, people are like, oh, you're lying about all this corruption and stuff. And it's like, if you think about it, like if an innocent person gets accused of corruption or like any allegations, like what's the first thing they're going to do? They're like, oh, I didn't do that. They're going to defend themselves. But that's not what we see right here. I've been doing this for 4 years, trying to like bring light to this situation. And the whole time it's like they all run, they try to discredit me. They file the fake stalking injunction against me. I'll go to a meeting with Hines, with Joel LaSalle, with the RDA, with Erin, with everyone on a panel, and I'll sit up there and we can walk through the whole community with this stuff, because like this is all factual evidence. This is what happened. So like the fact that they can't show up and defend their actions, I think speaks volumes to this.
Yeah,
so.
And that's very often the case. If you can discredit the messenger, then you can believe that you're going to be immune to any sort of repercussion to the allegations.
Yeah, and it's really unsettling too, because it's like I had this quote I wanted to read real quick too. So this is from I kind of accidentally stumbled in all this corruption. I was doing all this research and just learning more about. I found out about redevelopment agencies, just kind of how they work and stuff. In 2011, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, he dissolved all 400 RDAs in the state of California. They found out they were all corrupt. They call them like rogue agencies and secret governments. They were just siphoning billions and billions of dollars from public good into like developers and corporations.
I brought that up. It seems like an RDA with the woman running for Ogden mayor, Angel Castillo. She came in and I was like, it seems like it enables a mayor to start a fiefdom.
Yeah.
Because if you have all this property and you got all these donors, how can you not want to entice more donors and more money by using your little property development agency?
Yeah, and one of the things I think about is like, well, why is this happening here and not like elsewhere? It's because Salt Lake has so much more money, but it's also smaller, so like everyone knows each other.
Real estate prices have gone through the roof in the last 5 years.
We had a weird experience like a year or two ago where Murray City was trying to destroy like a historic block. And it was so surreal because we all showed up. It was almost like just verbatim of like what happened with the Pantages, where the whole community turned out and everyone loved it. But at the end of the meeting, the city council in Murray City was like, well, the community spoken, looks like we're not going to do this deal. Like, let's do something else. I'm like, that's all it took? It was that easy to just listen to the community, listen to your constituents. So it was really wild. But with the RDAs and what happened in California, finding out they're all corrupt, it's exactly what we see here, because like Danny Waltz, this guy who's the director of the RDA, Erin Mendenhall protects him, right? He's just a city employee. He's not an elected official. He doesn't. It's
the unelected officials doing the most damage to every.
He just controls a very powerful agency in the city. And
was he all through Biskupski, the same position?
He came right around. Right after like 2016, 2017, he was like at a different department of the city. But if DJ Baxter was still the RDA director, this would have never happened, So, but like I have this guy, Danny Wallace, he wrote RDA memos. Like we found out they were writing them with Hines in conjunction, like city memos, writing with them, with the developers. There's this kind of this timeline in some of these documents I show where he had this big memo come out in 2018. Like, basically like that was the first big, like, salvo of like, hey, this theater can be restored, blah, blah, blah. He like had the seismic cost like being inflated, and he has such stupid arguments for why it can't be restored. Like, oh, there's not enough parking. We can't dig under the theater and build parking. We're like, what? So like he has this big document come out and 2018. A few weeks later, he goes to Preservation Utah, and there's a board meeting, and we have the documentation of this. He was at the board meeting, and everyone there like told him the theater was historic, and they like refused to believe it. So we have like evidence that he knew the theater was historic going back all the way to 2018.
Wow.
When people of SHPO, Preservation Utah, architects were all discrediting his like seismic costs. They all showed up and like told him like, hey, this is historic. And ever since then, it's just been this ongoing pattern of collusion and corruption to hide the facts from the public. They had they were supposed to do public tours and surveys in 2018 with Downtown Alliance and Preservation Utah. They were just suddenly canceled for like no reason. And they're supposed to have updated seismic costs in 2019. I actually talked to like Reevely Engineering and some of the people that were behind it, and they have no idea why it was just suddenly canceled, you know? So like every time there's an opportunity for the truth to come out, it's like this guy, Danny Waltz, just like having his finger on the button. I literally have him on video during city council and RDA meetings where he's basically lying to city council people. Chris Wharton asked him point blank, he's like, hey, is this historic? What's the tax credits, you know? James Rogers asked him as well, and they're just like, well, we'll find out, you know. And it's like they knew the whole time.
So going back to what you discovered in California, they dissolved all the RDAs. So how do they handle historic preservation and
well, I think that's the
now?
big question too, and I think they've tried different things. I'm not sure what the model is right now, and we've kind of talked about this too. Is it best to dissolve the RDA, or maybe a simpler solution would just be to remove. Right now, the mayor is the executive director of the RDA, and the city council is the board of the RDA. So I think it might be better to just like, you know, it's too much power and too much corruption, and like, you know, there's so much money in Salt Lake City. Maybe just not have these people have anything to do with that, and have maybe the RDA people be completely separate, and have it like its own separate little thing where maybe it's like people are elected to the RDA or something. But it could be used for a great power of good. You know, I'm trying to run to house everyone, to hurry and build housing and stuff. And it's like, this goes directly into housing and homelessness because again, they gave this public property that was worth $20 million away for free. But on top of that, they're building luxury apartments. You know, they're building 60-80% AMI. These aren't affordable for anyone. So they're using tax dollars to subsidize luxury housing, like artificially rising costs. I actually have a real estate license and been involved in the real estate for a long time. But like if we actually take the public money and we build public housing and build from the bottom up, you know, we can drive pricing down. And that's exactly why we don't see it happening, because developers are controlling everything. But
that's what Rocky said we should do as well. I honestly am a little skeptical of the government being in the public housing business.
Yeah,
doesn't seem like the government has the best track record for being
I think there's a lot of tools.
Housing.
Public housing's one. There's also rent control. I'm very excited about the third option that we talk about a lot. It's kind of the newer option that it's like has pilot programs around the country, and that's inclusionary zoning. And Rocky and Erin, every time it's brought up, they're like, make the claim like, oh, the state won't let us do that. I'm like, well, fight back against it, you know, and let us take control of the city back. But inclusionary zoning is basically like, so if we have an apartment complex of like 250 units or whatever, we can make 20-25% of those units basically affordable at certain rates. So it's like a blanket wide thing. And it's so great too, because like instead of public housing, we're not segregating housing for like, oh, this is the homeless house, or this is, you know, we're not creating these like slum areas that people can just be spread out.
You mean the government would give a check to the landlords to make it affordable?
Yeah, it's just like, but not really in a different way that's going on right now. They're just like giving them a blank check for nothing in return. It would put more power, like control back in the hands of the city. And it would just like, it basically like cap rent prices. So like, you know, for the example, if it's like 20 or 25% of these units, they'd be capped at like, hey, this is a 1 bedroom at $500, a 2 bedroom at $750 or whatever. They'd have to be capped. And, you know, having a background in real estate,
so that's not rent control?
It's called inclusionary zoning. It's like a updated, like newer kind of, you know, it's similar to rent control, but a little bit different.
I'm been following a little bit the story of what the new Los Angeles mayor is doing.
Yeah.
And she's gotten a lot of headlines. She's trying to get the homeless people off the streets, step one. And she's spending $1 billion of the budget just to first get them off the streets and putting them up, a big percentage of them, into hotels and motels. And saying, I know this is not a long-term solution,
sure,
but we're going to fast-track affordable housing through no longer allowing NIMBYism to really reign supreme.
Sure.
And I look at that and I'm like, that sounds really great.
Yeah.
But when was the last time developers just were like, "Oh, okay, if you say so, Mayor, we're going to do what you say"?
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into what's happening right now in LA. The model I kind of been really inspired by is Houston. They were able to just put people directly into housing. They've housed about 25,000 people in the last 10 years. Most of them, successfully. I think there was like 80 or 90%.
Is that permanent supportive housing type deal?
So basically, they just moved past the shelter model and these middle models and went straight to permanent housing, and that's really only the cure. Finland is on the verge of curing homeless too. They have a plan to house everyone by like 2027. So like, what's so cool about this is like I have a platform of like curing homelessness, eradicating homelessness. So it sounds crazy, but it's like we can be one of the front runners of doing this and seeing what else is happening around the world, or we could just like stick behind and as other people do this. But it's crazy to think about when we already have so much housing. Like in America, there's like, it used to be higher. It was like 15 million like vacant houses. It's like,
go to Park City.
Yeah, even at the most conservative level,
nobody
it's like
in those
we could give
neighborhoods.
every homeless person a house, and we'd still have like 12 million houses. Something crazy like that. But just like looking at this problem differently, I kind of see it as like the private prison industrial complex, where it's like, you have these groups like Shelter the Homeless and all these people like taking so much money from the state. They build these giant shelters, and I'm like, how do you spend $60 million on 3 shelters that are full the first night, that aren't even long-term solutions, where people get abused, where they get their stuff stolen? Some lady had her like mom's ashes or something thrown away in there, and then they get kicked out in the morning to just be left to wander the streets. It's like, that is not a solution, but we're spending so much money on this. And there's actually been studies done on a national level where it shows it's just cheaper to put people directly into housing. And, I mentioned before I was homeless, and one of the biggest issues that I have is that all the people that are, working on these issues right now, they're elected in office, they've never been homeless. They don't understand what it is. There's a huge, like, disconnect of what actually means to be unsheltered versus what they think it means. If you talk to any unsheltered person, they all have solutions that are very good, and a lot of folks just like, hey, I want to build my own tiny house, like let me just have somewhere to stay. I'm not lazy, I want to work. And then it's like looking at each of these people individually, if they have trauma, if they have drug use, if they're vets, or if they're disabled, not going to be able to work at all. They really need that stability as a launching pad to then better their lives, and they never get that in a shelter, because then they're just kicked out and they're unstable most of the time. So when I was homeless, it's like a 24-hour cycle. You're just like constantly like, where am I going to shower, where am I going to eat? Like, you can't think about normal people stuff of like what kind of job I'm going to do, or
Well, I also see permanent supportive housing in Utah has completely failed as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at even the most recently built place that was so celebrated when it opened, the Magnolia Apartments. I have a contact in there, an inside source, who tells me everybody there is on drugs.
Yeah.
Nobody works. Every unit's getting trashed.
Yeah.
And now sex trafficking is very common in that
It's
facility.
heartbreaking.
And I talked to a guy who worked for Housing and Urban Development under Ben Carson, because they are the ones kind of driving the shift from temporary
Under HUD.
Yeah, under HUD. They're the HUD is driving the initiative to move away from the shelter model to the permanent supportive housing model, because they're realizing we can solve homelessness with permanent supportive housing, whereas temporary shelters, that model's not proven to be effective.
Yeah.
But the problem is that to qualify for permanent supportive housing, you need to either have a disability or you need to prove you're chronically homeless.
Right.
So it's like this race to the bottom.
Totally.
Where to get your get out of jail
They
card.
actually talked, there's a great article about the Houston success, and they actually talked about that too, where it was like that before they kind of changed their approach. It was that way. A lot of people couldn't get into housing, and then
they just need to change the approach.
Yeah, they just stopped judging people, and they're like, well, they don't have to, there's no pre-qualifiers, just, it's just basically a queue, and then it's your turn. But it wasn't like, hey, you have to be like, on drugs.
Well,
or
they don't have,
level.
oh, you mean they don't have pre-qualifiers
to get into
how
housing.
Bad you've got to be to get in.
Yeah, they were just getting people into housing, just straight into housing. Which is really cool. And like, I think the other part too of why
and the other aspect is like, you really can't work.
Yeah.
Or you're penalized. You could lose your housing.
Yeah, see, that's a big problem too. And and again, it's like we're trying to just like when you have a hammer, every issue is a nail, right? But it's like I had at my store at the Rio Grande, I have people come in all the time, unsheltered folks, and like, I had this person come in and they're like half blind and on disability and, elderly, and they're like, they can't get a job. You're not going to be working, so it's like to expect people to like have a job from that. But everyone's situation is individualized and unique. But I was going to mention too, I think a lot of the permanent supportive housing models, like if it starts failing, a lot of time it's because it's not funded well enough, with like case managers and people checking in and them actually getting into therapy or getting into, sessions or group therapy or other things that they need medically, health-wise to then better themselves,
Well, I look at the model of the road home who manages the Magnolia Apartments, Wendell, I believe Grace Mary Manor and a few others, Palmer Court. That model that the road home operates under is no strings attached. You keep your housing, and the only way you can lose your housing is actually success. Like you if you get your income up high enough, you're no longer
you get
qualified.
graduated. Yeah.
So why would you go out and get a job and really learn to be a productive citizen?
Yeah.
SwitchPoint, on the other hand, as a different model, they make everybody work to the extent of their capability. So if you're a veteran, you're blind, you're disabled, of course you can maybe do a tiny bit of weeding each day, and they're not going to expect anything more out of you. But Carol believes that everybody gains their dignity through work. You don't gain your dignity by sitting at home watching Jerry Springer all day in your free house.
Yeah,
and it's like those differences in models, like tapping into your innate desire to feel productive and have a purpose. That I think that has to be a part of the model. Because if you're basically just saying, okay, you're pretty much useless and worthless, we're going to put you up in an apartment. And if you get a job, you potentially could be kicked out, because then you're proving you're not worthless and you are productive.
I don't know. I'm very curious about the coming decades and stuff, and I think I have my platform here, and like one of the reasons it's so aggressive, I'm running on ending homelessness, but also like universal basic income and things like this, is because of like growing automation and like the way society's going and stuff. And it's like at some point people are losing more and more jobs to like AI and tech and automation and all this stuff. Like if we don't get these like kind of like base foundations put in place, like things are going to get really crazy. Suddenly like huge chunks of the population can't work. And,
I hear that.
Like tying all this to capitalism in a way, but
I hear that AI and automation is going to destroy jobs. But then you talk to restaurant owners. We have a lot of connections with restaurant owners. Cool. They are so hard up for bussers, dishwashers, prep cooks. Even some of them I know can't maintain hours and can only be open like Wednesday through Saturday because they can't hire people. And that's sort of remnant from I think what I call the experiment on UBI was the pandemic, just giving people free money to not work. That was the hardest time in so many business owners' careers, when you couldn't hire anybody because everybody was getting paid to stay home. At
the same time, child poverty went plummeted through the ground, so it's like there was a lot of benefits from that as well. And it's just I don't know. It's such a weird situation when we're minimum wage hasn't gone up in such a long time.
But who's getting paid minimum wage? You can't find anybody.
But it's just that's kind of the floor though. And these questions are tricky, but you really have to like re-examine. It's like, well, what do we want society to look like? And how do we want these problems to be solved? And what's being successful around the country? Rocky was talking recently about like Austria and, some of their programs have done amazing stuff too, but then they also have, healthcare and all these other education and all these other systems. It's not just housing, it's all these other things that go with that too. Mental health treatment and accessibility and stuff like that.
Yeah, but, that's another huge one we're missing. So it's like a lot of the problem with the resource centers, from the people I've talked to who've tried to stay on them, is a small percentage of the people are severely mentally ill staying there, and they cry out in the middle of the night. They do all sorts of horrible things, and then you're trying to sleep next to that person, and then how do you go to a job the next day
there's no privacy.
You can't sleep? I
have this sad situation where my grandma, when I was younger, she was schizophrenic, and she died when I was a kid, but I talked to my family a lot, because she lived at a different time and she was able to get into like nursing homes and different things. But it's like, we're almost like glad she's not around right now in a way, because like I think it would have been so much harder if she was like, the treatments aren't there for someone like that who is schizophrenic. It's like she probably would have gotten thrown in jail a lot more, and the police would have picked her up and like all this crazy stuff, and those services just wouldn't be available for her now when they were easily back then.
Do you support the idea of again opening up mental institutions for people who are otherwise?
I just think they need services and they need support and treatment, and I mean there's a lot. I'm not saying we go backwards and like start lobotomizing people and stuff, but like just the money's not there, the resources aren't the same as they were, and we're treating people more as like a commodity these days than I think we have in a long time, where this is like a transaction, like I'll put you in a house, but what are you going to do for me, versus like, hey, you're just a human being, you need somewhere to stay and live, and you deserve housing as a human right. So I think there's all these kind of conversations to be had, but I am concerned that a lot of I'm running I found out if I was elected, I'd be like the third youngest mayor in Salt Lake City history at 35. I'm like the first millennial to run. And it's millennials, like the first generation to go backwards in America. We have worse quality of life than our parents. We're not able to buy housing. Costs are through the roof. I can't imagine trying to start a family with kids and stuff right now. I don't know how people do it. I've wanted to buy a house for a long, long time. I've never, I haven't been able to do it. So, if America is, the American dream, I always think is like to have our children have better quality of life than we had, to give more to the next generation and make it growing better and better and better. But somehow we lost that along the way, and it's like,
blame the baby boomers, man. They screwed it up for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of troubles with this, income inequality, and then it ties directly back into what we're talking about right now, because then these people get into the office. Erin Mendenhall is the mayor of Salt Lake City. She took an oath of office to serve the public. So the city council took an oath of office to serve the public. Instead, what they're doing is giving away public resources to their donors, to real estate companies, to Hines, based out of Texas, has nothing to do with Utah. That they have $160 billion they manage. They can afford to buy any property they want. They can just go, do their projects. They don't need to destroy public property. They don't need to steal money and resources from the public. So, there's all this stuff going on, and you guys have been covering the homeless stuff really amazing with abatements and things. And like, while she's giving, the Pantages deal $20 million away for free to billionaires, 160 people died last year in the streets. And, Erin's building apartment complexes with her husband, Kyle LaMaffa, like just down the street from my spot at the Gateway. And she was lying in AMAs recently about that. They're claiming that Kyle just owned one house when he owned 6 parcels. And, we're not getting the truth and accountability and transparency.
Yeah, I have something to say about that, because we reported on that as well. And Kyle contacted us asking us to correct our story and not call him a developer, because he didn't develop the property. But I asked him, did you buy the parcels of property that then turned into the development? And he said yes. Yeah. In my mind, that makes you a developer. Yeah. If you're acquiring the land to build the property, that is called development.
Yeah, especially if you're buying multiple parcels and combining them to one thing. That's literally development.
That's a development.
And what's crazy about this is if you go to the county recorder and look up those parcels, they still say Kyle LaMaffa on them. Still have his name on there. And recently, Erin Mendenhall's, her campaign manager, Ian Koski, he was, people kept asking him, getting these questions about Erin's husband being a developer. It's really her family, because she's married to this guy. Like they're sharing finances and stuff, so she's a developer too. But they kept saying, "Oh, he sold the properties," and well, okay, that opens up a whole bag of questions now, because it's like, when did he sell the property? How much did he sell it for? I actually went and pulled the documents from that. It's the Altaview Apartments is the property they're developing. It's worth it's like $53 million apartment complex. On a lot of the documents, it literally says LaMaffa Development on them. So the whole narrative of like, oh, he sold them and he has nothing to do with the current development. It's like, well, why is the document saying LaMaffa Development if he's not still a part of the deal? So the whole, I think there's a lot of questions. And again, it goes back to transparency. You serve the public. You are the mayor of our city. You work for us, not the other way around. If you're hiding stuff, you need to reveal it. If your taxes are different than what they are, if you're making all these monies on the sly with your husband doing all these deals,
Yeah.
If he sold the property, how many millions of dollars did he sell it for? You know, you're not selling
Is
six
that
parcel.
in the public record somewhere?
I'm not sure. It's you can find like tax
I guess
records
the
and
county
stuff.
recorder's office should have
Yeah,
that.
you can find tax records of like when they appraised the land and stuff, but like
Yeah.
it's sometimes not always accurate of what, you know, the property was sold for. But there's no way in hell like you have 6 parcels of like downtown Salt Lake City land, and he didn't sell it for like a lot of money. But I think it's a false narrative. I think they're still part of the deal. I'm curious, like, you know, what equity they have in the property, like, you know, with this company, and what other deals they're doing, you know.
Well, it's obvious that the city and the state is controlled by developers primarily, and they are calling the shots.
Totally.
And there are so many people who are back in the shadows, who are financing campaigns and giving money out.
Yeah.
And for me, we learned just last week that the UDOT has approved for the gondola to go up Little Cottonwood Canyon, which is an absolutely horrible idea.
It is, yeah.
If you want if you have a pristine wilderness area with an amazing river going right down the middle, you don't want to stick a 30-foot concrete pad holding a 200-foot tower, 23 of them you're going to have to put up, and call that a improvement.
Yeah.
That's just such a horrible idea.
I was just talking about that on social media, and I kept tying it in with their plans to extend I-15 and Bangor and destroy all these houses and things. And you know, all these studies have shown extending, you know, freeways don't do anything, and we need to invest in public transportation. And it is wild. Like, you know, it seems like all of our money and everything is just it's like not a democracy anymore. And that's the perfect segue into this, because you know, this kind of whole story with me in the theater, you know, I just started out to do film and things, but then kind of stumbled into this whole world of corruption. I think this is one of the most corrupt stories in city history. I mean, Erin's doing a bunch of other things too, but like, this is pretty wild. So I found this report. It's from the White House. It's the United States Strategy on Countering Corruption. It was like published in December of 2021. But there's just this quote I'd like to read real quick at the beginning here that I really think sums this up perfectly. So it says, when government officials abuse public power for private gain, they do more than simply appropriate illicit wealth. Corruption robs citizens of equal access to vital services, denying them the right to quality health care, public safety, and education. It degrades the business environment, subverts economic opportunity, and exacerbates inequality. It often contributes to human rights violations and abuses, and can drive migration. As a fundamental threat to the rule of law, corruption hollows out institutions, corrodes public trust, and fuels popular cynicism towards effective, accountable governance. So, you know, the real important part about corruption, and again, why I'm, you know, running and talking about this, is this has eroded democracy. You know, we're supposed to be able to go to these city council meetings, to the RDA meetings, and have a dialogue and be listened to by our leaders, you know, by Erin Mendenhall, by the Salt Lake City Council. That hasn't happened for 4 years. It took me 2 years to even meet with her. And then when it happened, it was a bad faith meeting. She just sat there, didn't do anything for 10 minutes, and then just, you know, wiped her hands of it. And it's like, well, what are you doing? This is you know, you are the mayor of this city. You swore an oath of office, you know, to serve the people here. And it's baffling that this is happening, that this is, you know, the world we live in right now, as this is going on. So,
yeah, well, I'm glad you're shedding light onto it. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that you're a millennial, and I think the number one thing is more people need to be involved.
I think so too.
More people need to be informed.
Yeah,
They got to. You need a media that's actually shedding light and truth.
absolutely. Yeah,
Holding truth to power. And it's like, you're doing this work. It's like a
Yeah.
lot of people end up doing their own citizen journalism.
yeah.
So I appreciate
Absolutely.
what you're
Yeah, we
doing.
got the grandma request back, and it was just so many documents. I kind of just like fell into this whole investigative reporting thing and was putting all this
Yeah.
stuff together. I just couldn't believe it. And then, you know, it's just absolutely mind blowing. And it's funny too, because I'm a filmmaker, and it's like I couldn't write a script like this. You know,
No.
like real life is always
Yeah,
way more insane than any movie could ever be. But
the way the homeless situation is going, and
Yeah.
the covering up of homeless deaths, and the way that they won't divulge any of our grandma requests. They're just holding on to this information.
Really?
They won't let us know unintended deaths.
That's absolutely wild.
We asked for that 8 months ago.
and you guys should be able to get it as a press
Yeah.
organization.
And I've heard she's a wonderful person. Candy Allred is in the public services of providing the grandma information.
Okay.
She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball. Let me get it right back to you. I promise I'll get the."
That's the city recorder.
She told me that 3 months ago. I said, "So what's up?"
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And so we can't proceed with our story.
Yeah.
That we started a year ago,
That's
where all
insane.
the homeless people were saying there's a lot more death going
Yeah.
on than what's being reported. They're all telling me that. Every
Absolutely.
single one of them. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the facts straight.
Yeah.
Because I was really attacked for coming out with that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I tried to get the data and even sift through
That's crazy.
thousands of police reports that put that unattended death in
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and they won't provide it.
That's so crazy.
So we're in this limbo. But I think if more people got involved
Yeah.
in the local issues, like
Yeah, yeah.
stop worrying about what Biden and Trump are doing,
Totally. Yeah.
focus on the local issues, then we can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
You can't make a difference of what's happening in the
Yeah, I have a
national
similar
politics
story
of-
with that. I can't believe that you guys aren't getting those documents. We did this grammar request in March of 2021. We did it like from when they first bought the theater up until 2017, 2018, 2019, something like that. But we didn't get like everything. Because and we're not journalists, so we had to like pay for everything. That's where the hurdle, they just be like, oh, $5,000 or some insane amount, And we got this first batch, and then I tried to go get more. I tried to like do grammar requests for different records and things. I tried to grab them myself just to like see if I'm like being talked about in conversation, what's going on, and they just they wouldn't give it to me. The grammar requests were just canceled.
You just got sick of fulfilling your request.
The grammar request before, they would I do a grammar request like, oh, it's too broad, you got to narrow it down. They just kept canceling mine. They're like, oh, it's just canceled. I'm like, well, let me narrow it down, So I had to, now I have my lawyers involved and stuff, but we have ongoing, litigation for this, and I feel like it's really important to get justice for it. And again, it's like, we need to set a precedent that like our city is not for sale, that this is still a democracy here in Salt Lake, that people have power, that these asshole developers from Texas can't come in here and just bribe our mayor and steal our property and, file stalking injunctions against the citizens that try to speak out and stop them. And, I do think there is a silver lining and, a positive ending to this story of, getting this land back and reclaiming our democracy and rebuilding a theater people can use for the arts, and we can still do all that great stuff. It's just, it sucks they had to, destroy it, but in a weird way, I think it proves their guilt a lot more, because it's not a crime to try to destroy a historic theater. It is a crime to, illegally destroy a historic theater that was protected from historic laws, and, all based on lies, fraud, and corruption and things. So, but
well, good luck with your campaign, and good
Thanks.
luck with getting it rebuilt. That would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah,
that would be
I'll
great.
keep at
Just
it.
put the housing right on top of it.
Yeah, I think so too. And the great part about that is, there's these win-wins here. We don't have to pit people against each other. We don't have to destroy the arts or defund historic things.
Yeah.
We can still do all that stuff and still have affordable housing and kind of find win-wins for everything. So
Where can people learn more about your candidacy and supporting the theater?
Yeah, so my best spot right now is on Instagram. It's Mayor Valentine SLC. I'm working on a website. It's going to be mayorvalentine.com. I'm hoping to launch that pretty soon. I'm designing myself, so it's just taking a second.
Yeah.
And then the theater stuff, we have kind of two different areas. We have our nonprofits, Friends of the Pantages on Instagram. And then we have a big Instagram. It's Avenge the Utah Pantages now.
Avenge the
Yeah,
Pantages.
it was originally
I like
Save
that.
the Pantages. This is the part 2, like Star Wars.
Yeah.
And then eventually
Avengers
it'll be
Part 2.
return of the Pantages, probably.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
well,
cool. Well, thanks for coming on, Michael.
thanks, man. I really appreciate you giving me a spot here. And again, telling the stories that no one else wants to tell. I was in newspaper in high school. I have a huge love for journalism and investigative reporting and all this stuff. You guys are doing an incredible job.
I really appreciate it when there's anybody out there actually also doing the work that needs to be done, because it all starts from the grassroots up. I think people don't realize that. You just go to some local community council meetings, city council meetings,
Totally.
RDA meetings, get involved, know what's going on, and you'll start to take ownership over this place.
I think
and
so,
you'll
too.
start to feel like you're part of something.
That's one of the
bigger.
things I feel like I've been fighting the most, is not really the the current administration or like these developers or anything like that. Obviously, there's money involved. These are trying to take on the capital city and these giant developers that have endless pockets. But I feel like the big thing I'm fighting is just apathy. People just like tune
not
out.
enough people. They got their Twitter and their Instagram and their TikTok.
It's like really hard to get people to pay attention.
Attention is the most valuable commodity. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thanks, Michael, for coming on. If you want to be a bigger part of Utah Stories, go check out our subscription. It's $36 for the entire year to have an issue of the magazine delivered right to your home. And we had a story about this written by Kathy McKidrick 2 months ago. And that's how Michael contacted us, and she interviewed you and Joel LaSalle. Yeah. So we're covering these issues with our awesome team of local journalists, and with your support, we can continue to do that. Thanks so much for watching. Share this program with a friend. Like, subscribe. Hopefully YouTube is going to keep us online. We love you, YouTube. Just don't censor us, please. I'll see you next time.